As a scholar, of course, I'm reading all the time, book after book after book, article after article. I find that I can read in a variety of contexts. I'm one of those who probably prefers to read in a coffee shop than a library, so I'm pretty odd as a scholar that way. Maybe it's because I had 5 kids making a lot of noise for a lot of years. I'm used to noise in the background. Libraries scare me, they're too quiet. I concentrate better working in all kinds of different environments, again, including coffee shops. I will read at my desk sometimes, but often if I'm reading, underlining a book, I'll sit in an easy chair in my house and do the reading there. So all those different situations work well for me, at least. My reading for my scholarship is pretty much dictated by the projects I'm focused on. So if I'm working on a Pauline theology, I've got a stack of books that one of my TAs kindly gets for me from the library at Wheaton or through interlibrary loan, brings them to me, and I work through them. Some I read very carefully because I could see they're important and they're making contributions. Some, to be very honest, I'll skim pretty quickly and say, yeah, not much new here. I don't know that I need to deal in much detail with this book. So one of the things I encourage my own students is to learn what needs to be read carefully and what can be kind of skimmed without doing any damage to the work that you're trying to do. I should say also that in terms of reading habits, I have never been one who can only read my academic work. I'm always reading books of history, mystery novels, etc. I don't think I could live if I were only doing scholarly reading all the time. Some of the books I love, for instance, are the history writing of Barbara Tuchman. I love the mystery novels of Dorothy Sayers, the Lord Peter Wimsey series, for instance, which I've read and reread. I like fantasy. I'm a J.R.R. Tolkien fan, as a lot of you are. I think I've read the whole Ring cycle now 5 or 6 times, probably. So in one ways you could say, oh, what a waste of time when you could be reading another significant monograph on Paul, but I need to keep my mind involved in different things like that to keep going. When I'm reading for my academic work, I am now more than I used to, so certainly it's probably as true for all of us, reading books online. Where I can just, if I come to a significant quote, I can just copy the quote, paste it into my own notes, and not have to re-keyboard everything. So that saves some time that way. Unfortunately, many of the books that are available online don't have careful delineation of page numbers. When you're doing scholarly work, you need to cite page numbers accurately. So I still do most of my reading the old-fashioned way in books. When I come to significant bits, I summarize in my own program. I use EndNote as my bibliographic program, and I usually take my notes in a Word document. So I will open up a Word document on a particular issue and feed those notes into the document. And of course, if there's a quote I want to include, then I have to re-keyboard, which I'm not very good at. I'm not a fast typist, unfortunately. One of the things I found very important in taking notes, number one, is to take notes carefully. So make sure that if I'm taking a quote from somebody, it clearly is a quote in my notes so that I don't misattribute something of that sort. I also find it really important when you're starting a project, when I'm starting a project, to try to create as a detailed an outline of the project as I can so that when I take notes, I can drop them into the appropriate place. Otherwise, you end up with this unwieldy Word document that you're constantly having to search through for keywords or something. But if you come up with a nice outline to begin with, then you can automatically drop notes from book X or article Y into the appropriate place and then find it there when you're ready to write on the topic. In terms of trying to structure a book from the beginning process of initial outline, research, and completed, I tell my PhD students this all the time. I said, you're not going to know how to organize your project until you're finished. You can make a best guess, and the more thinking you can do up front, the more better thinking you can do up front in terms of organizing the project, the better off you're going to be. You're going to save yourself time at the end. But the fact is, until you really get into the material, until you've really dealt with it in some detail, you can't really know for sure how to organize things. So I find my ultimate organization that, let's say, appears in the book, chapter contents and so forth, is going to differ to some degree from that initial outline, because I've shifted some things around in what I think is a more helpful order as the process went along. Yeah, as we move along as students or in our scholarly career, we are going to come across books or articles that are dense and difficult. And initially you have to decide, is it worth my time investment? Is this article or book important enough to really invest the time I'm going to need to invest in it? And if it is, then you just need to read and reread. And for me, if the article or book is important enough and difficult enough, rereading often becomes the key to really understanding something. The other thing that can be helpful is if you're trying to learn with others. I think the collaborative model of learning is really helpful. So maybe you're working on a particular issue, but students are working on the same issue, and maybe you're reading the same book. We tend to just work in isolation, but making contact with others, reading the same book, sharing ideas, insights to help us all with our thinking about a book can be really valuable. My Christian pilgrimage and my thinking about the faith and my development of the faith, of course, the name C.S. Lewis is a well-known name for a lot of us, appreciated his writings. What I've appreciated about the writings of C.S. Lewis, strangely, are not so much his books of theology or even the Narnia Chronicles, which are great with children and so on. Great for adults too, I read them as adults. But his science fiction trilogy, which I think is less well known. What I like about the science fiction trilogy is that he creates a world in which you can really understand how God is operating, how there is a reality to the spiritual realm. That to me just always encourages me to think about my life here on earth in a much broader perspective, with the reality of angels and demons and God and Satan, all deeply involved in what's happening to my life and the world around me. So I've appreciated the science fiction trilogy, which I've read and reread 3 or 4 times, I'm sure, over the course of my life, to just give me that sense of reality. When you're sitting down, whether to write something, whether it's a paper or an article or a book, that blank screen you face is one of the most daunting challenges there is. How do you begin? I encourage my own students to just begin with substance. In other words, often you can sit and think about, what's the opening sentence that's going to captivate my audience, and how can I frame that sentence in the perfect way? You can spend hours, you can spend days trying to figure that out, and much better to just plunge into the content and then go back and frame the content with the necessary introduction and conclusion and so forth. I also find in my work, and this is, I'm not suggesting that others necessarily do this, but it's what works for me. When I'm working on a project, rather than working intensely with the text first and then reading other scholars, I tend to begin with the scholars. So if I'm going to work on a certain book, on a topic, I begin reading everything I can get my hands on that scholars have written. After I've tried to amass all of that evidence, that data, these views, opinions, contrary ideas, and so forth, then I bring that back to the text and do my textual work at the end. Most people do it in the reverse way, because they don't want their work in the text to be affected by all the reading they do outside the text. They want the text to stand on its own. Valuable insight, certainly. My preference is to let the text be the last thing I'm dealing intensely with. So having done all the reading, gotten the ideas, the issues out there that I need to think about, then I bring all of that to my work on the text, given me, to a certain extent, yes, an agenda from these other scholars about what I need to look at, what I need to decide and determine, judge to be right and wrong. I find that works well for me to do it in that kind of a sequence. In my experience, the old truism holds that the essence of writing is rewriting. I try to do the best I can as I'm working through a first draft. And sometimes I can get in the rhythm and move pretty quickly through that first draft. And I try not to get distracted about, oh, let me go back. That sentence isn't quite exactly what I wanted to say, and then you can spend time going back endlessly and trying to redo things as you do. I try to plow through pretty quickly in a first draft, recognizing that I'm going to go back and rewrite the whole thing again. And that sometimes I'm not sure how to rewrite it until I get to the end anyway. So to try to do it along the way is just going to be not very helpful at all. A couple of things that I think we need to really keep into consideration as we're doing our work, particularly as scholars and academics. Number one is the obvious one, that one of Satan's strategies is to get us so involved in our historical, critical work that we forget that we're dealing with a text that applies to us, that is God's word to us. It's designed to change us, to challenge us, to encourage us, to lead us to worship, and so on. It's easy to begin to treat the text as an artifact, as if you were just dealing with some other document from the ancient world. So that is something that one has to work at overcoming all the time. One of the ways I think that can be overcome, in my experience, again, it depends on your family situation, but my wife has been one I bounce ideas off of, I talk to her about, and she will often bring me up short and saying, well, that's really an interesting idea, Doug, but what relevance does it have? Or what does that say to people trying to lead the Christian life, And I'll realize, oh, I haven't thought that through yet. I haven't looked at that aspect of things. So I think that's really important. And then two, kind of related to that, in all the academic work I've done, I've always been involved in teaching lay people in the church, interacting with lay people. It keeps one grounded and helps to remind us about how the text is being used by the people of God in the context of the church.